Story 1. I never believed in the supernatural until 3 years ago. My name's Rachel, and I've lived in the same small town in Oregon my whole life. Nothing remarkable ever happens here. It's just strip malls, a few decent restaurants, and neighborhoods where everyone knows your business. I've always been the practical one in the family. My sister Jenna was the dreamer, always talking about ghosts and energies and whatever else she read about online. That changed on a Tuesday in November. The sky had been slate gray all day, spitting that annoying half rain that soaks you without you noticing. I was working from home, trying to finish a report from my accounting job while nursing a migraine that wouldn't quit. Around 3:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Jenna. Running late from appointment. Can you grab Lily from dance at 4? Lily was her 7-year-old daughter, my niece. The dance studio was only 10 minutes away, so I texted back, sure, and kept working until it was time to leave. I pulled into the parking lot at 3:55, killed the engine, and started scrolling through emails on my phone. Through the large windows of the studio, I could see the girls finishing up their class. The instructor was showing them something, and they were all trying to copy her moves. That's when I saw Jenna. She was standing outside the studio door, wearing her green jacket and checking her phone. I was confused. Hadn't she just asked me to pick up Lily? I rolled down my window to call out to her, but before I could, she looked up, smiled at someone I couldn't see, and walked around the corner of the building. What the hell, I muttered. I got out of my car and walked to where she'd disappeared, but there was nothing there except the side of the building and some dumpsters. No other exit, no other cars, no Jenna. I went back to the front of the building, figuring she must have gone inside. The class was ending, little girls streaming out to waiting parents. Lily spotted me and came running. Aunt Rachel, where's Mom? She asked, looking around. I thought I just saw her outside, I said, taking her dance bag. Didn't she come in? Lily shook her head. She texted you to get me because her appointment is running long. My skin prickled. Yeah, that's right. Let's call her. I dialed Jenna's number as we walked to the car. She picked up on the third ring. Hey, thanks for getting Lily. My therapist went over time and… Where are you right now? I interrupted. I'm still at Dr. Marshall's office, she said, sounding confused. Why? Dr. Marshall's office was across town, a good 20-minute drive from the dance studio. Are you sure? You haven't left yet? Rachel, what's going on? I've been here for the last hour. I'm literally just now walking to my car. My mouth went dry. I just saw you outside the dance studio. What? That's impossible. Green jacket, hair down, checking your phone. It was you, Jenna? I saw you clear as day. There was silence on the other end of the line. Rachel. Her voice had changed, gone tight and strange. I'm wearing my green jacket right now. I felt dizzy suddenly, like the ground had tilted beneath my feet. That's not possible. Put Lily on, she said urgently. I handed the phone to my niece, who chatted with her mom while I tried to process what had happened. I knew what I'd seen. It wasn't someone who looked like Jenna. It was Jenna. The same walk, same jacket, same way she always checked her phone with her head tilted slightly to the left. When Lily handed the phone back, Jenna's voice was shaking. Rachel, this is going to sound crazy, but remember when Grandma died? Our grandmother had passed away 2 years earlier. Yeah, of course. The night before she died, Mom called me in a panic because she saw Grandma walking in her backyard. But Grandma was in the hospital. She thought she was losing her mind. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the November air. What are you saying? I don't know, just bring Lily to your place. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and looked down at Lily, who was watching me with wide eyes. Is something wrong with Mommy? She asked. No, honey, I said, forcing a smile. Everything's fine. But as we drove away, I couldn't help looking in my rearview mirror at the spot where I'd seen Jenna. There was nothing there now, just the empty sidewalk and the darkening sky. Jenna arrived at my house exactly 18 minutes later. The moment she walked through the door, I could see she was terrified. Tell me exactly what you saw, she demanded after sending Lily to watch TV in the other room. I described it again. The green jacket, the phone, the smile at someone I couldn't see. Who was she smiling at? Jenna whispered. I don't know. There wasn't anyone there. She sat down heavily on my couch. This is bad, Rachel. Really bad. It was probably just someone who looked like you, I said, trying to sound rational even though I didn't believe it myself. She shook her head. 2 years ago, Mom saw Grandma the night before she died. 6 months ago, my friend Beth saw her brother at a gas station while he was in a car accident 20 miles away. He didn't make it. My blood turned to ice. Are you saying... I'm saying in my family, when someone sees your double, it's never been a good sign. That night, Jenna and Lily stayed at my place. None of us slept much. The next morning, Jenna seemed calmer. Maybe it was nothing, she said over coffee. Maybe you just saw someone who looked like me. Yeah, I agreed, relieved she was being rational again. That's probably it. 3 days later, Jenna collapsed while shopping at the grocery store. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was already gone. Brain aneurysm, they said. Could have happened to anyone at any time. I still live in the same small town in Oregon. I still work my accounting job. I still pick up Lily, who lives with me now from dance class every Tuesday. But I never park in the same spot, and I never look at the side of the building where I saw Jenna that day. Story 2. Growing up in Millridge, a former coal mining town in rural Pennsylvania, you hear all sorts of tales about hauntings and spirits. Most times I just roll my eyes. That changed during my 8th grade year. Our middle school had this unique program called Wilderness Explorers, where instead of regular PE twice a week, we'd go hiking, learn survival skills, and do environmental projects. Mr. Keller, the teacher who ran it, was this burly ex-park ranger with a massive beard who believed kids needed to reconnect with nature. Most of us just liked getting out of school. About 3 miles from town sits what locals call the Abandoned District, a cluster of maybe 30 old company houses that were evacuated back in the 90s after mine subsidence made the area unstable. The coal company deemed it too dangerous, bought everyone out, and the place has been sitting empty ever since. The roads are all cracked with weeds growing through, and most of the houses have collapsed or been stripped for materials. We're not supposed to go there, Jake whispered as our group of 12 kids followed Mr. Keller down the overgrown access road. My dad says the ground could open up and swallow you whole. That's why we're sticking to the map safe zones, Mr. Keller called back, somehow hearing Jake despite being 20 feet ahead. The geological survey marked paths that are stable. Perfect spot for our geocaching exercise. It was early October, around 2:15 in the afternoon. I remember checking my watch because I was worried about making it back for basketball practice. The air had that crisp fall feeling, and leaves crunched under our boots as we walked deeper into the abandoned district. This place gives me the creeps, Maddie said, pulling her jacket tighter. My grandma used to live here. She said people reported weird stuff before they evacuated. Like what? I asked. Knocking sounds from empty houses, lights turning on where there's no electricity, the usual ghost story stuff. I rolled my eyes. Yeah, sure. We rounded a bend in the road, and that's when we saw her. About 50 yards ahead on what used to be someone's front porch, just a concrete slab with a few steps leading to nowhere, sat an elderly woman in a wooden rocking chair. She wore a faded floral dress with a high collar, the kind my great-grandmother wore in old photographs. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she had a shawl draped over her shoulders despite the mild weather. The chair creaked rhythmically as she rocked back and forth, staring into the woods beside what used to be her home. Our group stopped. Mr. Keller held up his hand. Hello there, he called out. We're from Millridge Middle School, just passing through for an educational activity. The woman didn't respond or look our way. She just kept rocking, muttering something we couldn't make out. Maybe she can't hear well, Maddie whispered. What's an old lady doing out here alone? Jake asked. There's no cars or anything. Mr. Keller frowned. Let's continue on. We'll check if she needs assistance on our way back. We moved forward cautiously, all of us watching the woman as we passed about 20 feet from her porch. I got a better look at her face, deeply lined with cloudy blue eyes that never once shifted toward us. Her lips were moving continuously, like she was having a conversation with someone invisible. I always said it would come back. Told them not to dig there. Darkness underneath. I caught fragments of her mutterings as we passed. None of us spoke until we were well past her house. That was weird as hell, Tyler said, breaking the silence. Language, Mr. Keller warned, but even he seemed unsettled. Some elderly folks never really left when the evacuation happened. The authorities check on them occasionally. That explanation made sense, but something still felt off. The rocking chair moved with a perfect mechanical rhythm. And those eyes, they seemed to look through the trees rather than at them. We continued another quarter-mile to our geocaching location. Mr. Keller divided us into teams and gave us the coordinates for hidden containers we needed to find. My team found ours within 10 minutes. A small waterproof box containing a logbook and some trinkets, tucked under a fallen log. The whole activity took maybe 15 minutes. As we regrouped and started heading back, I felt a strange anticipation about passing the old woman again. "I'm going to at least ask if she's okay," Mr. Keller said as we approached the bend in the road. But when we rounded the corner, the porch was empty. No woman, no rocking chair, nothing. Mr. Keller stopped abruptly, causing Jake to bump into him. "Where'd she go?" Maddie asked, looking around. "Maybe she went inside," I suggested, though I didn't see any structure that could qualify as inside, just broken foundation walls and a partial chimney. Mr. Keller approached the concrete slab cautiously. "Hello? Ma'am?" We followed behind him, spreading out to look around the property. There was no sign anyone had been there. No footprints in the dirt around the porch. No indentations where the chair legs would have been. "Guys, look at this," Tyler called from the edge of the porch. He was pointing at the concrete. We gathered around. There, clearly visible in the weathered concrete, was an inscription: Margaret Wilson, 1922 to 1986. That's a grave marker," Mr. Keller said, his voice unnaturally tight. "But we all saw her," I insisted, feeling cold despite the afternoon sun. "She was right here, rocking and talking." Mr. Keller checked his watch. "We need to head back now. Stay together, everyone." No one spoke as we hurried along the access road, moving much faster than we had coming in. I kept looking back over my shoulder, half expecting to see the old woman following us, but the road remained empty. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those cloudy blue eyes and hearing fragments of her muttering. The next morning I asked my mom if she knew anything about someone named Margaret Wilson. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked sharply. When I explained, leaving out the part about seeing the woman, my mom's face paled. "Margaret Wilson was the last fatality in the mines before they closed," she said quietly. "They say she warned the mining company about digging in a certain section. When they ignored her, there was a collapse that killed her husband. She died a few years later, still living in that company house, still talking about what lies beneath. They buried her on her property because she requested it in her will." I never told my mom what we saw that day. I never told anyone except the other kids who were there. Mr. Keller canceled the next 3 Wilderness Explorer outings with no explanation. Sometimes I drive past the access road to the abandoned district. I never go in. Some things just can't be explained. Story 3. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. I mean, I watched horror movies and listened to those late-night radio shows about hauntings, but it was all entertainment to me. Until last December. I should probably introduce myself. I'm Marcus, 34, working IT support for a healthcare company in Portland. I've lived alone since my divorce 3 years ago in a second-floor apartment in an older building downtown. Nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom with high ceilings and those weird radiators that clank all night in the winter. The building's got character, as my realtor put it, which is code for hasn't been updated since the 70s. Anyway, it was a Tuesday night, December 3rd. I remember because I'd had this mind-numbing conference call earlier that day about upgrading the hospital's server infrastructure. I'd just gotten off a late shift around 11:30 p.m. and was completely wiped out. The weather was miserable. Pouring rain, winds strong enough to make the windows rattle. Portland winters, right? I heated up some leftover Thai food, watched half an episode of some show I don't even remember, and passed out on my couch without even making it to my bed. I woke up suddenly around 3:17 a.m. I remember looking at my phone because the specific time stuck with me. You know that feeling when something just pulls you from sleep? Like a noise or something? But there wasn't any noise, at least not that I could identify. The TV had shut itself off, and the apartment was completely dark except for the faint orange glow from the streetlights filtering through my blinds. What woke me was this: pressure, like the air had gotten thicker somehow. My throat felt tight, and I had this overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. "Hello," I called out, feeling stupid even as I said it. My voice sounded muffled, like the air was absorbing the sound. That's when I noticed the temperature. It was freezing. I mean, my apartment isn't exactly well insulated, but this was different. I could see my breath clouding in front of my face. The thermostat read 48 degrees, which was impossible. I keep it at 68 minimum. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight, and that's when I saw him. Across the living room, standing in the hallway that leads to my bedroom, was this kid. Couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, except he wasn't exactly there. I could see through him, like smoke that had taken a human shape. He was wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothes, short pants, a button-up shirt with some kind of collar. His face was, God, I don't like thinking about his face. It was blank, not featureless, but vacant, like nobody was home. "Jesus Christ!" I yelled, scrambling up from the couch so fast I knocked over my coffee table. I lunged for the lamp switch and flicked it on. The room flooded with light, and the figure was gone. Just like that. Vanished. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stood there for maybe a full minute, just staring at the empty hallway, wondering if I'd dreamed the whole thing. Sleep paralysis, maybe? I'd had that once in college. To reassure myself, I walked over to the hallway, lamp still on. Nothing there. No cold spots, no weird vibes, nothing. Just my normal, slightly messy apartment. "Get it together, man," I muttered to myself. "You're stressed out and exhausted." I checked the whole apartment, bedroom, bathroom, even my closets. Nothing out of the ordinary. I convinced myself it was just a weird half-dream and decided to try going back to sleep, in my actual bed this time. I turned off the lamp, and immediately the cold returned. Within seconds, I felt that same heavy pressure in the air, and there he was again, in exactly the same spot, watching me. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice shaking. Obviously, it didn't answer. I hit the lamp switch again, and just like before, the figure disappeared instantly. The room warmed up. Everything returned to normal. I tried an experiment. Light on, nothing. Light off, the boy would appear within seconds, always in the same spot, always with that empty expression. After the third time, I couldn't take it anymore. I left every light in my apartment blazing and sat on my couch until sunrise, completely freaked out. I didn't move, didn't sleep, just sat there clutching a baseball bat I keep under my bed. For regular intruders, not whatever this was. When morning finally came, I called in sick to work. I spent the day researching the history of my building online. It was built in 1923, originally as a single-family home, then converted to apartments in the 60s. I couldn't find any records of deaths or accidents involving children, though. That night, I crashed at my buddy Dave's place, making up some story about a plumbing issue. I couldn't bring myself to tell him what really happened. He'd think I was losing it. I went back the next day when it was bright outside. The apartment felt normal, nothing unusual. I told myself I'd had some kind of episode brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But when darkness fell, I couldn't make myself turn off the lights. I just couldn't. I slept with every light on for a week straight. My electricity bill that month was ridiculous. Eventually, I had to try again. I needed to know if I was going crazy or if something else was happening. So exactly 1 week later, I sat in my living room at midnight and turned off all the lights. I waited, heart pounding. 5 minutes passed. 10. Nothing appeared. The room stayed warm. I let out the breath I'd been holding and laughed at myself. Of course, it had been my imagination. I was just about to get up when the temperature plummeted. I felt that pressure again, like being underwater, and there he was. Not in the hallway this time, but right in front of me, maybe 3 feet away, close enough that I could see the pattern on his shirt buttons. All I know is that I'm telling this story with every light in my apartment turned on, and I intend to keep it that way. Story 4. I never thought I'd share this story online. Hell, I barely mention it to my closest friends. But after reading some of your experiences, I figure why not throw mine into the ring. This happened back in 1997 when I was living in rural Nebraska. Dad worked at the grain elevator in town, and Mom ran a small daycare out of our farmhouse. We weren't exactly poor, but money was always tight with 4 kids. I was 11 that summer, awkward, skinny, and obsessed with my hand-me-down Schwinn bike. That bike meant freedom. Our house sat about 3 miles outside of Oak Ridge, population 842, surrounded by corn and soybean fields that stretched to the horizon. That particular day, July 18th, stands out because it was my little brother's birthday. Mom had sent me into town to pick up his cake from the bakery. I remember being annoyed because it meant missing part of my friend Tyler's pool party, but Mom promised I could still go after the errand. The ride into town was uneventful. Hot as hell, dusty, typical Nebraska summer. I got the cake, chocolate with dinosaur decorations, and carefully secured it in my backpack for the ride home. It was about 4:30 p.m. when I started back. The sun was still high, beating down mercilessly. I was taking the usual route, County Road 16, a straight shot of gravel and dirt that cut between the Henderson's cornfield and the Williamson's soybeans. About halfway home, I stopped to drink some water. That's when I heard it, a weird chittering sound coming from the cornfield to my right. I figured it was probably just a raccoon or something, but it didn't sound quite right. I got back on my bike and picked up speed, suddenly feeling uneasy. The corn was tall that year, way over my head, and the rows created these perfect corridors of green that disappeared into darkness. That's when I saw something move between the rows. At first I thought it was Mr. Henderson checking his crops, but this was small, maybe 4 feet tall, and it moved weird, jerky but fast, like those stop-motion creatures from that old movie, Jason and the Argonauts, my dad loved. I slowed down, squinting against the sun. The figure darted between 2 corn rows about 30 feet ahead of me, and I caught a clear glimpse of it. It was wearing, or maybe it was, completely yellow, like a bright, unnatural yellow from head to toe. Not clothes exactly, more like its skin was this uniform yellow color. The only exception was its head, which had this weird greenish tint to it. Not hair, more like, I don't know, a cap, or maybe just the top of its head was green. Its proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, legs too skinny, and it moved with this unnatural purpose, like it was late for something important. "Hey!" I called out without thinking. Stupid kid reflex. It stopped, dead still. Then slowly, so slowly, it turned toward me. I couldn't make out a face. That's what still freaks me out the most. Where a face should have been, there was just a blank, like a smooth yellow surface with maybe, and I'm not even sure about this part, 2 small dark indentations where eyes might be. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then it made this sound, like someone trying to imitate a cricket but getting it wrong, and bolted across the road, moving so fast it was almost a blur. It disappeared into the soybean field on the other side. I didn't wait around. I pedaled harder than I ever had in my life, the birthday cake forgotten and probably getting crushed in my backpack. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that yellow thing was following me. When I got home, I was sweating and out of breath. Mom took one look at me and asked what was wrong. I told her everything, the words tumbling out between gasps. She just frowned and said, "Honey, you probably saw one of those Cabbage Patch Kid dolls. The Henderson kids might have left it out in the field." But I knew better. No doll moves like that. No doll makes that sound. No doll stands and turns and watches you. Dad was even less helpful. "Heat stroke makes people see things," he said, not even looking up from his newspaper. "Drink some water and cool off." I never saw the yellow figure again, though I looked for it every time I rode past that spot. Sometimes I'd get off my bike and stand at the edge of the cornfield listening, but there was never anything but the rustle of leaves and the distant buzz of cicadas. We moved away from Nebraska the following year when Dad got a better job in Ohio. I've told this story maybe 3 times in my life, and every time I get the same reactions, raised eyebrows, awkward laughs, and quick changes of subject. But I know what I saw. Story 5. I've never been one to believe in the paranormal. Growing up in rural Michigan, I was taught to question everything and find logical explanations. But what happened last October at the Pinewood Community Tennis Courts still gives me chills when I think about it. It was a Tuesday night, unseasonably warm for October in Grand Rapids. My roommate Jake and I had gotten into the habit of playing night tennis after our evening classes. The courts were usually empty after 9 p.m., and we'd play until the automatic lights shut off at 11. That night felt different from the moment we arrived. The air was unusually still, and the usual distant sounds of traffic seemed muffled, almost non-existent. "Place feels dead tonight," Jake commented as we set our bags down on the bench. I nodded, scanning the empty park around us. "Yeah, weird vibe." We started playing around 9:30. I remember checking my watch because I'd promised my girlfriend I'd call her before midnight. Jake was winning, which was annoying me because I'd beaten him 3 times in a row the previous week. "You're telegraphing your serves," he taunted after scoring another point. "I can read you like a—" The lights went out mid-sentence. "What the hell?" I squinted at my watch. "It's only 10:17. We stood in darkness for a moment, confused. The only illumination came from the distant street lamps at the park entrance. "Timer must be screwed up," Jake muttered. "Happens sometimes." We gathered our rackets and water bottles, using our phone flashlights to see. My phone battery was at 12%, so I switched it off to conserve power for the drive home. "You got your car keys?" Jake asked as we walked toward the parking lot. I patted my pocket. "Yeah, right here." We were about halfway to my car when headlights suddenly swept across the lot. A blue Honda pulled up beside us and the driver's window rolled down. It was Jake's sister, Melissa. "Where the fuck have you been?" she demanded, staring at Jake. The interior light showed her face was pale, agitated. Jake looked confused. "Playing tennis? What's wrong?" "I've been calling you for the past hour." She held up her phone. "First time someone answered but wouldn't say anything. Second time some guy just laughed. It wasn't you, Jake. It didn't even sound human." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. Jake frowned, reaching for his pocket. His expression changed. "I don't have my phone." "What?" I asked. "My phone. It's not in my pocket." He patted his shorts, then his jacket. "I must have left it on the bench." Melissa looked terrified. "Call it right now," she said, her voice shaking. "Please call it right now." I pulled out my phone, ignoring the low battery warning, and dialed Jake's number. We all went silent, listening. Nothing happened for several seconds. Then faintly we heard it, a ringtone coming from the direction of the courts. But it wasn't coming from the bench area where we'd left our bags. "That's coming from the middle of the court," I said slowly. We walked back, following the sound. Melissa stayed close behind us, using her phone's flashlight. The ringtone got louder as we approached the net. And there it was, Jake's iPhone, lying face down in the exact center of the court. "I never put it there," Jake whispered. "I swear to God I never went near the center during our game." I picked it up and handed it to him. The screen showed my incoming call and nothing else. No missed calls, no recent calls, nothing. "Check your call log," Jake said to his sister, his voice tight. Melissa pulled up her recent calls. 3 outgoing calls to Jake's number at 9:50, 10:05, and 10:15. Each call had connected and lasted between 15 seconds and 2 minutes. "Someone answered," she insisted. The first time, there was just breathing. The second time, someone laughed. It was like echoing, distorted. The third time, I heard what sounded like the tennis ball hitting the court, but no voices. Jake scrolled through his phone. "There's nothing here. No missed calls until Ryan just called me." "That's impossible," Melissa said. "I spoke to someone." A sudden gust of wind blew across the courts, unusually cold for October. The chain-link fence rattled. "Look at this," Jake said suddenly, his voice hollow. He turned his phone toward us. The battery level showed 100%, but his phone had been at 23% when we started playing. I'd seen him check it and complain about needing to charge it later. "Maybe it's glitching," I offered, but even I didn't believe that explanation. "Let's get out of here," Melissa said, already backing toward her car. As we turned to leave, the court lights suddenly blazed on again, momentarily blinding us. When my vision cleared, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, clear as day in the clay court surface, was a set of footprints. They started from nowhere in the middle of the court, right where we'd found the phone, and walked in a straight line toward the gate. They weren't our footprints. Jake and I had been wearing tennis shoes with distinct treads. These looked like someone had been barefoot, and they were wet. "Ryan, did you see that?" Jake asked, pointing to the prints. I nodded, unable to speak. "See what?" Melissa called from her car. By the time we looked back, the footprints were gone. The court surface was completely dry and undisturbed. We drove home in silence that night, following Melissa's car. Jake kept staring at his phone, which now showed no battery anomalies, no mysterious calls, nothing out of the ordinary. 3 days later, the Pinewood courts were closed for renovation. The official reason was structural issues with the lighting system. I never played night tennis again. Some things just can't be explained, and I've learned I'm better off not trying. Story 6. I never considered myself superstitious. Growing up in northern Michigan, weird stuff happens in the woods all the time that has perfectly logical explanations. Animals make strange noises, trees fall, weather does unexpected things. I was always the skeptic in my friend group, the one who rolled my eyes when someone claimed their house was haunted or they'd seen something in the forest. Until 3 months ago. I moved into my cabin near Traverse City last year after my divorce. It's nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, small kitchen, living room with a wood stove, and a wraparound porch. The nearest neighbor is about a quarter-mile down the dirt road. I bought it because I wanted the solitude, the quiet. I work remotely as a software developer, so as long as I have decent internet, I can live pretty much anywhere. The cabin sits at the edge of a clearing with dense forest behind it. The previous owner, Mr. Kaminsky, told me the property had belonged to his family for generations. When I asked why he was selling such a beautiful place, he just muttered something about getting too old to deal with the winters and changed the subject. Should have been my first clue. The first few months were peaceful. I settled into a rhythm, worked during the day, hiked the trails in the evening, maybe drive into town once a week for supplies. I even adopted a German Shepherd mix from the local shelter. Named him Ruger. He was great company and made me feel secure being out there alone. It started in January. The winter had been harsh, snow piling up outside my door faster than I could shovel it. One night, with the temperature dropping to -15, I was awakened around 3 a.m. by Ruger growling. Not his usual alert bark when deer or raccoons wandered by, but a low, threatening sound I'd never heard him make before. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, sitting up in bed. He stood rigid by the bedroom door, hackles raised, staring into the dark hallway. The growl continued, building in intensity, but he wouldn't move from that spot. I grabbed my phone for light and the baseball bat I keep under my bed. Nothing seemed out of place as I checked the cabin. Doors still locked, windows secure. But when I reached the kitchen, I froze. The back door was wide open, snow blowing in across the floor. "Shit," I muttered, hurrying to close it. I was certain I'd locked it before bed. I always triple-checked, especially during winter. But maybe I'd been distracted, made a mistake. Ruger refused to come to the kitchen. He stood at the threshold, still growling, refusing to enter. I chalked it up to the wind somehow, forcing the door open, and went back to bed, though sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I found footprints in the snow leading from the forest to my back door. They weren't human prints, too large, oddly shaped, with what looked like only 3 toes. They disappeared at my door and didn't continue back toward the woods, as if whatever made them had simply vanished at my doorstep. Probably just animal tracks distorted by the wind, I told myself, but the unease lingered. That night, I double-checked every lock and even pushed furniture against the doors. Ruger seemed on edge, pacing the cabin restlessly. I finally fell asleep around midnight, exhausted from the day's anxiety. The knocking woke me. 3 distinct knocks on my bedroom window. My bedroom is on the 2nd floor. I lay paralyzed, the sound echoing in the stillness. Ruger wasn't growling anymore. He was whimpering, curled into a ball under my bed. 3 more knocks, deliberately spaced. Tap, tap, tap. "This isn't happening," I whispered to myself, clutching my blankets. My window faced the forest, and there was no way anyone could reach it without a ladder. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay put, I slowly turned toward the window. A face stared back at me. Not human, not animal. Something wrong. Its skin was ashen gray, stretched too tight over a skull-like face. Its eyes reflected the moonlight like a deer's, but they were too large, too aware. The proportions were all wrong. The jaw too wide, the neck too long. It smiled. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It pressed one elongated hand against the glass, fingers splayed. Each finger ended in a tapered point, more like claws than human digits. "Let me in," it said, voice like rustling leaves. "It's cold out here, Mark." It knew my name, my chest constricted, lungs burning for air. I couldn't look away from those reflective eyes. The creature tilted its head, the movement jerky and unnatural. "I've been watching you," it continued, voice clearer now, as if it was speaking directly into my ear despite the glass barrier. "You're alone too much. We could keep each other company." I found my voice finally, though it came out as a croak. "What are you?" The thing's smile widened, revealing teeth too numerous and sharp. "A friend. Just a friend who needs warmth." It tapped the glass again. "The invitation works both ways, you know? You could come out here with me." Something in its tone shifted, became hungry, eager. I felt a pull, a compulsion to get up and open the window. My hand was reaching for the latch before I realized what I was doing. I jerked back, heart hammering. "No," I managed to say. The creature's expression changed instantly, twisting into something hateful. It hissed, pressing both hands against the glass now, claws scratching tiny grooves into the surface. "You'll change your mind," it promised, voice no longer gentle. "They always do eventually. The cold and the loneliness get to them." A sob escaped me, terror finally breaking through the paralysis. I grabbed my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, but the screen remained dark. Dead despite being fully charged when I'd gone to bed. When I looked back up, the thing was gone. I didn't sleep again that night. At first light, I packed essential belongings, grabbed Ruger, and drove straight to my sister's place in Grand Rapids. I told her there had been a break-in attempt, which wasn't entirely a lie. I've never returned to the cabin. Story 7. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. Growing up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I was raised practical. Fix what's broken, work hard, and trust what you can see. That changed 3 years ago during a business trip to Portland. It was late October, the kind of autumn where the rain doesn't just fall, it seems to hang in the air, making everything damp and cold. I checked into this old hotel downtown, the Montgomery, a renovated building from the 1920s. The lobby had that fading elegance, brass fixtures turning green at the edges, marble floors worn in paths from a century of footsteps. "Room 237, the clerk said, sliding the old-fashioned key across the counter. "Third floor, end of the hall." I remember thinking it was quaint they still used actual keys instead of key cards. The elevator creaked the whole way up, and when I stepped out, the hallway stretched long and narrow, with flickering sconces that cast more shadows than light. Room 237 was freezing when I entered. I cranked the ancient radiator and called the front desk. "Heating's temperamental in the old section," the clerk explained. "Give it an hour. If it doesn't improve, we can move you tomorrow." I was too tired to argue. After a lukewarm shower, I climbed into bed with my laptop to prepare for tomorrow's meeting. That's when I first noticed something was off. The room had been cold when I arrived, but now the temperature was dropping, even with the radiator hissing. I could see my breath. My fingers felt stiff as I typed. It wasn't just cold. It was unnaturally cold, like being inside a freezer. "Piece of shit hotel," I muttered, grabbing the extra blanket from the closet. Then I heard it, a soft scraping sound from the bathroom, like fingernails on tile. "Hello?" I called out. Stupid, I know, like a horror movie cliche. The scraping stopped. I told myself it was the pipes, or the wind, or the building settling. I tried to focus on my presentation again, but the temperature kept dropping. The digital clock on the nightstand read 1:17 a.m. when the bathroom door slowly swung open. No draft, no wind, just opened. "This is ridiculous," I said aloud, my voice sounding thin. I got up to close it. That's when I saw it in the bathroom mirror. A dark shape behind me, just over my shoulder. Not quite solid, but not quite smoke either. A silhouette with no features except two pale spots where eyes should be. I spun around. Nothing there. I looked back at the mirror. The shape was closer now. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound tough despite my voice cracking. No answer, but the shape in the mirror shifted, like it was tilting its head. I backed out of the bathroom, slammed the door shut, and pressed my back against it. The cold was intense now, painful, like my lungs were freezing from the inside. "Fuck this," I whispered, grabbing my phone to call the front desk. No signal. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone. When I bent to pick it up, the bathroom door pushed against my back. Something was trying to get out. I lunged for my suitcase, fumbling for clothes, planning to get the hell out. That's when I heard a woman's voice, so close it could have been whispering directly into my ear. "You're in my room." I froze. The voice wasn't threatening. It sounded confused, maybe even sad. I, I'm sorry," I stammered, not knowing why I was apologizing to empty air. "I'll leave." "They never tell them about me," the voice continued. "They just keep putting people in my room." The bathroom door swung open again. I couldn't move. In the mirror's reflection, I could see the dark shape more clearly now. A woman, her features blurred like a photograph taken while moving. But her eyes were sharp, pale blue, almost white, fixed directly on me. "What happened to you?" I asked, the words escaping before I could stop them. The shape drifted closer. 1963. Honeymoon. He didn't like my dress. The temperature plummeted further. The mirror began to frost over from the edges. "I just want to rest," she whispered. 60 years in this room. I don't know what possessed me, but I found myself saying, "What can I do?" The lights flickered violently. The frost on the mirror began to form a pattern. Letters, I realized. A name. Evelyn. "Remember me," the voice said. "Just remember me." Then something brushed past me, a cold so intense it burned. For just a moment, I thought I caught a glimpse of a young woman in a blue dress, her neck at an unnatural angle. And then, nothing. The cold lifted. The room temperature began to rise. My phone buzzed with notifications as signal returned. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the desk chair facing the bathroom door until dawn, when I checked out and told the front desk clerk there was something wrong with room 237. The clerk's face changed. "Did you see something?" "Evelyn," I said quietly. The color drained from his face. "We don't use that room much," he said carefully. "How did you know that name?" I learned later about the honeymoon couple in 1963, about the argument, about the young bride found in the bathtub. The hotel had covered it up, renovated the bathroom, kept renting the room until reports became too frequent. I've tried to rationalize what happened that night. Maybe I was overtired, or it was a vivid dream, or someone slipped something into my dinner. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Story 8. I grew up in a small town in Wyoming, one of those places where everyone knows everyone, and the nights are so dark you feel like you're walking inside a pitch-black cave. My name's Daniel, and back when I was in my early 20s, I worked as a camp counselor at a boys' summer camp nestled in the middle of the woods. It was a peaceful gig, during the day anyway. The camp's layout was spread out, to say the least. My personal cabin was at the farthest edge of the property, about 2 miles away from the central meeting area. I'd always found the solitude nice, though there were moments when the dark seemed just a little too heavy out there, away from everyone else. But I told myself it was just trees and animals, nothing more. It was one of those muggy summer nights. You know, the kind where the air feels like it's wrapping around your throat and squeezing? I'd been finishing up some paperwork for the camp and realized I left a folder back in the main lodge. It was almost 3 a.m., and the idea of trekking down the narrow, unlit trail back to the lodge wasn't exactly thrilling. Still, I grabbed my flashlight and started walking. Now, this path, 2 miles of it winding through thick woods, was second nature to me by then. My flashlight was small, its beam not doing much to push back the pressing darkness. My boots crunched over the gravel trail, the sound far too loud in the quiet. The kind of silence where you can't even hear the chirp of insects or rustle of leaves. Just nothing. And it didn't sit right with me. I thought I saw movement in the trees, just at the edge of the flashlight's glow. I stopped, squinting into the woods. Deer, I muttered to myself. I mean, what else could it be? I kept going, though my pace quickened. About a half-mile from my cabin, I suddenly felt odd. You know that sensation when the hair on the back of your neck stands up, like someone's watching you? My stomach churned, but I didn't hear or see anything. Still, the flashlight's beam seemed to grow weaker, as if the light was being swallowed by the night. I took a deep breath and told myself I was being ridiculous. Just a quiet night in the woods. That's all. Then I saw it. A hand. Just a hand. Reaching out from the shadows on the trail in front of me. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The pale fingers were impossibly long, unnaturally thin. It didn't make sense because there was no body attached. Just the hand, suspended there in the air as though it were held up by invisible strings. I froze. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking embarrassingly. I shone the flashlight directly at it, but the light seemed to bend around the hand, as though it refused to touch it. My heart pounded so hard in my chest, I thought it might burst. Then it moved. The hand jerked towards me, faster than anything I've ever seen. My instincts kicked in. I reached for the pocket knife I always kept clipped to my belt. My fingers fumbled, but I managed to pull it out. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as the hand darted closer, its ghostly fingers outstretched. Without thinking, I swung the knife. I expected resistance, a solid hit, anything, but my blade cut through nothing. No sound, no feel of flesh, no hand. It was gone. The knife still hung midair where I'd slashed, as if the hand had vanished into the void. I didn't wait to figure out what had just happened. My body moved on its own, and I took off running down the trail, lungs burning, legs pumping faster than they ever had in my life. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle of leaves amplified in my ears. I didn't dare look back. I just ran. When I reached my cabin, I slammed the door shut and locked it, pressing my back against the wooden frame. My knife was still in my hand, my fingers gripping it so tight they hurt. My flashlight had been dropped somewhere along the trail, but I didn't care. I crouched in the corner of the room, knife ready, waiting for the rest of the night to swallow me. But it didn't come. Nothing else happened. The next morning, I searched the trail in daylight, hoping I'd find some logical explanation. A branch, a piece of cloth, something. There was nothing. Not a single clue. And yet, the image of that hand stayed seared in my mind, vivid and cold, as though I could still feel its presence just beyond my reach. I didn't stay at that camp much longer. Whatever that thing was, I didn't want to risk running into it again. I'll never know what it was, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. Story 9. They say every house has its quirks. Ours? It was the stairwell. Nothing sinister, mind you. Or at least that's what I used to think. My name's Samantha, and I grew up in a 2-story colonial-style house in the Midwest, the kind with creaky floorboards and drafty windows. My mom always joked that the house had character. Looking back now, I'm not so sure that's the right word. I must have been around 11. It was a quiet Saturday morning, and Mom had gone out to run errands. I was home alone, left with the ever-so-exciting chore of folding and putting away laundry. Our stairs were peculiar. We had this old carpet runner that stretched from the top to the bottom of the staircase, but it wasn't properly secured. The only thing holding it in place was a nail or two at the very top. The rest of it, a loose, bubbly mess just waiting to trip someone up. With a basket of freshly folded laundry in my arms, I started climbing the stairs, balancing the weight of blankets and clothes against my chest. My vision was blocked entirely, but I knew the steps by heart, or so I thought. Halfway up, my foot landed on one of those dreaded air bubbles in the carpet. It shifted under me, and my heart sank as I felt myself losing balance. The world slowed. I remember thinking, this is it. I'm about to tumble backward, snap my neck, and that's the end of Samantha. My body tilted, gravity pulling me back as I hugged the laundry basket tightly. My feet slipped off the edge of the step. I was airborne for what felt like an eternity. Then just as I was about to go crashing down the stairs, it happened. Two hands, strong, steady, pressed firmly against my shoulder blades. The shove was so sudden, so deliberate, that it launched me forward. My feet landed awkwardly back on the step, and I slammed into the stair rail, gripping it like my life depended on it. My laundry basket tumbled to the side, but I didn't care. I was alive, shaking, but alive. "Mom!" I gasped, twisting around to look behind me. There was no one there. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart hammering in my chest. "Mom!" I called again, louder this time. Nothing. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the fridge downstairs. I scrambled up the rest of the steps, dumped the laundry in the hallway, and bolted from room to room, checking every corner of the house. Every door was locked, every window secured. No sign of Mom's car in the driveway. I finally grabbed the phone and dialed her cell, my hands still trembling. "Hey, sweetie," she answered cheerfully. "What's up?" Are, are you home?" I stammered. "No, I'm at the grocery store." "Why?" I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. "Oh, nothing," I muttered. "Just thought I heard something." I hung up and sat on the top step, staring down the staircase like it was some kind of living thing. There was no logical explanation for what I felt. Those hands were real, solid, and yet no one was there. To this day, I can't walk down those stairs without feeling like I'm being watched. Not in a menacing way, though. It's weird, but it feels protective. Like whoever or whatever was on that staircase wasn't trying to hurt me. They were saving me.